Welcome back, everyone, and today we pause to honor those we've recently lost. American stars, yes, but also figures from across the world whose presence quietly shaped the lives of people who may never have met them but somehow felt close to them anyway. If this kind of tribute matters to you, a like goes a long way. It helps us keep doing this work with the attention and sincerity it deserves. We're glad you're here. Let's take this time together. Daphne and Angela Pleasance was 84 when she left us, and the way she went was very much in keeping with the way she lived. Her family broke the news without fanfare, no lengthy statement, no public ceremony. Just a quiet acknowledgement that she was gone. That restraint felt right somehow. She never seemed like someone who wanted the world to stop and stare. If you grew up watching British cinema in the 1970s, particularly the kind that left you slightly unsettled, you probably crossed paths with her work. Films like Hitler, The Last 10 Days, From Beyond the Grave, Symptoms. These weren't blockbusters. They were something else entirely. The kind of pictures you watched late and thought about longer than you expected. She had trained on the stage, and it was visible in everything she did. A precision. A stillness. The ability to hold a scene without reaching for it. She didn't over-explain with her body or her face. A single glance could carry what other performers needed whole speeches to communicate. There's an entire generation that doesn't think of those films as movies exactly, more like moods, textures, something that got into the walls of a particular time in their lives. She was woven into that. Away from the cameras, she kept to herself. No tabloid presence, no hunger for the spotlight beyond what the work required. She simply did what she did and then stepped back into a life that belonged to her. It's a particular kind of legacy, not the loudest, but one that holds. Another face from that era now belongs entirely to memory, and it will stay there. 48 years old. When you hear that number attached to a death, something in you resists it. Michael Patrick was 48 when he passed, and his wife Naomi Sheehan told the world in the gentlest way possible. He went peacefully, she said, in a hospice in Northern Ireland, with the people who loved him beside him. There's a certain mercy in that, even if the loss itself feels anything but merciful. Game of Thrones is where many people will place him first. He wasn't always front and center in that world, but he was part of it, and that show meant something real to the people who followed it. It wasn't background noise. It was appointment television, the kind of thing that gave strangers something to talk about on Monday mornings. But to stop there would be to miss the fuller picture. He was also a writer. Someone who approached storytelling not just as a craft but as a way of seeing. That dual understanding, performer and writer both, gave his work a particular depth. You sensed he wasn't just saying lines. He was inhabiting them. His illness, motor neuron disease, was something he faced without turning it into a public performance. It remained his, private, handled with dignity. That says something about the kind of person he was. 48 is a number that stops you cold because it forces you to think about everything that doesn't get to happen. The roles left unplayed, the pages left unwritten. Time, as it turns out, doesn't negotiate. What survives him is his work and the quieter truth that he touched people's lives simply by showing up fully and honestly, without ever making a show of it. Africa Bambaataa, born Lance Taylor in the Bronx, was not just a musician. To call him that would be like calling a river just water. What he represented, what he helped build, was far larger than any single song or album. Hip-hop in its earliest days was not a polished product. It wasn't made for radio or retail. It came out of the Bronx in the late 1970s when that borough was struggling, and it carried all of that struggle inside it. Bambaataa was one of the people standing at that particular crossroads, helping to point the way. The Universal Zulu Nation wasn't a record label. It was a movement, a deliberate attempt to channel the energy of young people who had very little in the way of conventional options towards something constructive, something meaningful. That kind of vision doesn't get enough credit when people talk about the origins of the genre. Then came the music. Planet rock in the early 1980s felt like a door opening onto something that hadn't existed before. Electronic production meeting street culture. It was new in a way that genuinely surprised people. He wasn't always the face you saw on the magazine covers. He wasn't the most commercially dominant figure in the rooms he helped build. But foundational doesn't mean famous. It means essential. For the people who were there, or who later found their way back to those recordings and that history, that period represents something deeper than nostalgia. It's part of who they became. Movements always look inevitable in hindsight. At the time they're fragile, uncertain, held together by a handful of people who believe in something before anyone else does. He was one of those people. And now he becomes part of the history he helped create. Steven Tyler wasn't handed any of it. He came into the world in 1948 in Yonkers, born Stephen Victor Talico, a name that carries none of the electricity he would later generate. His father was a classical musician, and the household he grew up in was one of rules and rigor. Music existed there, but not the kind that set anything free. Something in the boy chafed against all of it. You can picture him sitting at that piano, doing what was expected, and already hearing something different in his head. He was never going to be a quiet student or an obedient son. School lost him early. Structure never really caught him. And long before fame arrived, the substances were already there, circling. But the music, in its rawest form, never left. By the late 1960s he had drifted to Boston, and somewhere in that city, pieces began to connect. Aerosmith wasn't formed out of ambition exactly. It felt more like necessity. A place where everything that didn't fit anywhere else finally had a home. Before the image, before the legend, there was just this restless, ungovernable young man trying to turn the noise inside him into something the rest of the world could hear. The first album came out in 1973. It didn't immediately change everything. But something was already present, a sound that felt combustible. Then Toys in the Attic in 1975 and the shift was undeniable. Dream On stopped being just a track on a record and became something people carried with them. And Tyler on stage was not a performance in any conventional sense. It was closer to a controlled unraveling. That voice, so strange and elastic and dangerous sounding, worked precisely because it felt like it might not hold. The late 70s brought bigger crowds, longer nights, and a gradual blurring of the line between the performer and the wreckage. Fame has a way of enlarging whatever is already present, and what was present in him was considerable. The drive, yes, but also the chaos and the dependence. There were nights on stage where he seemed unstoppable. And there were nights off stage that told an entirely different story, one the audience never saw. Into the early 80s the damage had become structural. The band existed in name but the ground beneath them had shifted. Substance use wasn't a rumor being managed. It was the reality shaping every decision. Performances became ordeals. When Joe Perry walked out in 1979 it wasn't a personnel change. It was a crack running through the foundation. For a while the whole thing looked like it might simply stop. The turning point didn't arrive cinematically. It crept in slowly. By 1986 the people around him stepped in, the band included, and the road toward recovery began. It was not clean or linear. There were relapses. There were setbacks. There was the long, unglamorous work of trying again after failing. But the effort continued, and that matters more than the shape of it. Gradually, something that had seemed lost started to reappear. The late 80s brought a different version of Aerosmith. Permanent Vacation in 1987 didn't just revive the band. It introduced them to listeners who had been too young for the first chapter. Tyler was changed by then. Still volatile in the ways that made him compelling, but carrying something new. A knowledge of how close the edge actually was. Injuries came later. A bad fall in 2009. Vocal surgeries. The kind of physical toll that ends careers quietly and without ceremony. He kept going anyway. He became a grandfather. He became someone who had to do the hard work of repairing what the years had damaged in his personal life, not just his professional one. He could look back at everything without flinching and without pretending. That honesty is its own kind of achievement. When he takes a stage now, or even when he doesn't, what he carries is something earned. Not the need to prove anything. Just the commitment to still be here. Because for Steven Tyler, the point was never really the destination. It was refusing to vanish.